for inviting me to speak here today. Businesses are an integral part of society and have an active role to play in addressing both human rights and environmental crises, not only from a legal compliance perspective, but also as engines of long-term change through collaboration, engagement, and innovative due diligence solutions. Sustainability is not only the right thing to do, it makes business sense. By making global supply chains more sustainable, companies can reduce business risks, improve their resilience to potential market disruptions, and meet growing expectations from legislators, investors, and increasingly consumers. In doing so, companies should be able to improve their social and environmental performance. The increasing complexity and interrelated nature of both environmental and social impacts, as well as the systemic challenges around them, means that companies cannot address these issues alone. Engagement and collaboration within and across supply chains can be achieved through the use of effective due diligence tools, voluntary initiatives, as well as enabling legislative and financial frameworks that become the key element to achieving success. Multiple environmental crises, such as water scarcity, this past summer alone in Europe saw the worst droughts that we have ever experienced. In Asia, however, we've seen the devastating impacts of flooding in countries such as Pakistan and Afghanistan that have killed and displaced people in their hundreds and thousands. Deforestation has led to extreme wildfires in places such as Australia and the US, and this has prolonged intense fire seasons even throughout Europe, where the summer forest fires of the past year has released record-breaking carbon emissions. Chemical pollution in our soil and oceans are having catastrophic effects on ecosystems and limiting the ability of populations to produce food and for marine life to survive as a result of exposure to plastic waste. These examples are all posing a great threat both to the world and harming a multitude of human rights. It's reasonable that when faced with complex obstacles, such as pressing environmental challenges, constrained labour markets, food and energy crises, and a war on Europe's doorstep, as well as subsequent rising energy prices, high inflation, and supply chain disruption, it's no wonder that businesses could be tempted to consider sustainability more as a longer-term goal and not one that requires urgency. Although the obstacles are indicative of the dire consequences of man-made disasters, for the private sector, these challenges create further constraints that cannot be ignored. While not easy, adopting practices and centering operations around business and human rights benefits people, the planet, and in the long term, the bottom line. Let's face facts. Doing business, like every other human activity, comes with an impact. Not neutral, but needed. The question then is, how do we limit or remediate the negative impacts while we multiply the positive ones? Environment and human rights issues are interlinked, and addressing the two in isolation undermines business efforts to both manage operational risks and keep investors at bay. For instance, the textile industry, amongst others, can have a serious impact on the environment because of clean water pollution and therefore on the availability of drinking water for local communities and the appearance of chronic diseases. Equally, the production of furniture and other certain commodities have been linked to deforestation and land degradation. At the same time, textile, furniture, food, and other high-impact sectors also present the greatest potential to find sustainable solutions and have a key role in moving quicker towards a circular economy. Companies that reduce chemical impact in their supply chains see an array of benefits, including operational efficiency, lowering cost, increasing productivity, innovation, the creation of new revenue streams using sustainable business models, customer loyalty, increasing the community of consumers and buyers while reducing retention costs, and lastly, stakeholder engagement, improving goodwill amongst the broader stakeholder community to include civil society actors, amongst others. The disruptions caused by a lack of regard for the environment are harming a multitude of human rights, including the right to life, the right to freedom of movement, and the right to work. An integrated approach between the environment and human rights, the E and the S, is often talked about in the context of a just transition. Understandably, businesses might focus on the increase in green jobs when discussing their transition plans and are less willing to engage in the more difficult conversations around the negative consequences of moving towards a global economy which is no longer based in carbon. We cannot have a just transition without workers shaping it. A transition which invests in the workforce based on their needs and consults them as stakeholders in shaping that plan will mitigate negative human consequences and preempt future problems. Having strong human rights policies and practices implemented through sustained engagement with communities and robust due diligence mechanisms, which are developed by working with stakeholders to identify salient risks, will not only safeguard your business, but also ensure protection in the future. Involving rights holders when creating a clear mitigation plan, including remedy mechanisms that are implemented and reporting to the board, is the smart thing to do. I encourage businesses to engage with and develop, both with their suppliers, to manage human and environmental risks through an integrated approach and robust due diligence processes. Have an open conversation, be ready to provide support and leadership, both through capacity building and upskilling initiatives. Collaborative approaches are fundamental when it comes to engaging with vulnerable communities, especially as the number of communities which are considered at risk will increase with the worsening climate crises. Active collaboration and effective stakeholder engagement is a key part of the work we do at the UN Global Compact Network UK. Given the positive outcomes achieved so far, we do believe this is the way forward towards real change and progress on the ground. Incorporating models of co-ownership and co-benefit is a way of addressing human rights and environmental risks in tandem. We know that environmental disruption disproportionately impacts poor and marginalised communities. This only exacerbates existing inequalities and vulnerabilities. Where human rights protections are low, individuals and communities have less capacity to build resilience to environmental impacts. On the other hand, where human rights protections are strong, individuals and communities on the front line of environmental impacts have greater capacity to build social and natural capital assets, not just to survive the climate shocks and stresses, but to thrive despite them. It is therefore essential for the environment and the social to be in balance when we look at the green transition. For it to move fast, it must be fair. If not, we can expect and understand resistance from communities who end up impoverished, workers who are sidelined, and indigenous people whose lands are taken. At the UN Global Compact Network UK, as part of our mission to help the business community accelerate the transition to a sustainable future, we have been supporting companies in taking a holistic action to address human rights and environmental related issues through our Climate and Human Rights Building Resilience for Business webinar series, to which Amfori also contributed. Some of the key takeaways I'd like to share with you today include ensuring traceability of the supply chain all the way to raw material. This is key. There are tools and resources available that companies can use, for example, the Global Reporting Initiative. Secondly, responsible procurement and supply chain management are not only about avoiding risks, they are also about creating opportunities for regeneration, good farming practices, sharing benefits with marginalised communities, and empowering smaller contractors. For instance, companies can invest in sharing profits more equitably with farmers through long-term contracting and improving insurance policies. In doing so, farmers are provided with the opportunity to increase their income, while companies can benefit from demonstrating tangible actions to achieving various sustainable development goals and benefit from a relationship of trust with their business partners so that they can easily collaborate, build capacity around sustainability issues, and mitigate risks. As businesses move to accelerate their ESG impact, implementing a comprehensive and integrated strategy to tackle environmental issues and human rights issues is the most effective way forward for businesses to deliver a truly resilient future and to accelerate progress towards the SDGs. The urgency of human rights and environmental impact and the critical role of businesses to address them are turning into increasing expectation, both from legislators and investors. Companies should therefore consider the impact of their operations on both. To mitigate and remedy adverse impacts on human rights and the environment, businesses are expected to conduct human rights and environmental due diligence, also known as HREDD. In the words of Professor John Ruggie, the architect of the business and human rights movement, HREDD is a core tool for businesses to know and show that they meet their responsibility to respect human rights and the environment. The concept of human rights due diligence has been incorporated within many globally recognised sets of standards, most notably the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the OECD Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises. While the UNGPs do not address the environment explicitly, in the OECD Guidelines, the concept of human rights due diligence has been expanded to include the environment. And there is indeed growing global momentum towards mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence. Several countries, especially in Europe, have introduced laws embedding corporate respect for human rights and the environment into binding legislation. In 2017, the French Duty of Vigilance law paved the way for national legislation imposing mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence. More recently, we've seen the adoption of the German Supply Chain Act and the Norwegian Transparency Act. This growing body of local legislation adds to existing sector-specific or issue-specific due diligence, and there are regulations such as the EU Conflict Minerals Regulation and the upcoming regulation for deforestation-free products that have also been included. In February this year, the European Commission released the long-awaited proposal for a corporate sustainability due diligence directive, also known as CSDDD. If adopted and implemented by EU member states, the CSDDD would require EU companies and non-EU companies operating within the single market to prevent and minimise both their human rights and environmental impacts along the value chain through effective due diligence processes. Human rights and environmental due diligence legislation is therefore no longer a trend, but a stark reality. Mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence represents a critical step forward and plays a fundamental role in providing a level playing field and driving legal harmonisation and certainty for the private sector. They are then able to engage with their supply chain partners and reap the competitive benefits of sustainability. Beyond legal compliance, companies are moving from a traditional do-no-harm position to a more proactive, collaborative approach that considers sustainability. The opportunities for businesses to thrive by adopting human rights and environmental due diligence are numerous. Companies can gain a competitive advantage, unlock financial opportunities, build resilience to potential supply chain disruptions, improve their relations with stakeholders, grow their leverage in their supply chain, become the front runners ahead of the human rights and environmental due diligence trends, and gain a strong reputation as agents of change. However, we must acknowledge that there are limits to what businesses can do. While companies can use their leverage to address issues in their supply chain, there are many external factors with a direct influence, such as lack of transparency, the absence of robust, harmonised and enabling legislative frameworks, geopolitical tensions, and poverty and violence that are beyond their control. Collaboration is therefore fundamental. It's needed across the board, between local and regional governments, EU institutions, companies, civil society, affected stakeholders, and investors. By engaging with the right partners, companies can use collective action to improve local frameworks, obtain access to key data on the ground, improve transparency, build capacity in the supply chain, and establish long-term relationships of trust with high-risk business partners. In other words, collaboration is essential to both ensure impact and real change on the ground. Long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns and environmental degradation is affecting the lives of billions of people, especially those most vulnerable to environmental risks such as extreme heat, drought, flooding, and rising sea levels. For the private sector, the climate emergency is resulting in major risks and disruptions to global supply chains. Scientists predict such environment-related issues are bound to intensify in the coming years. We are now at a crossroads. Without rapid and bold action, containing environmental degradation and its potential to severely damage societies, economies, and the planet will be impossible. The IPCC, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, warns that without immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors, limiting global warming to 1.5% as set out in the Paris Agreement is beyond reach. Additionally, accelerated and equitable action in mitigating and adapting to environmental threats and impacts is critical to sustainable development and the achievement of the global goals by 2030. We must all scale up climate action to secure a sustainable economy and a livable future for all. There is an urgent need for collaborative efforts and initiatives by all societal actors. It is not enough to track and adhere to only legal requirements. Meaningful stakeholder engagement involves working with cross-functional teams and being proactive as opposed to reactive. This will help companies not only meet legal obligations, but streamline your approach so that it is consistent throughout the business. A holistic position enables for one policy that goes beyond compliance and sets high standards. As a business supplying goods and services globally, you do not need to adopt several policies, but one that will go beyond any jurisdiction or sector-specific best practice. This will put you in good stead to go above and beyond the law. The private sector has a crucial role to play, both in implementing effective and holistic solutions that also brings the social and environmental dimensions together. Only companies that take proactive steps to address the climate emergency through an integrated approach to human rights and the environment, rooted in collaboration, will thrive in the face of the unprecedented challenges the world and economies currently face. All signs suggest that the growing pressure being put on companies to be responsible businesses is only going to continue to increase. My recommendation to you all today is that you use your ambition to do better and be better as the catalyst needed to accelerate action and progress in this space. Get ahead of the curve. Demonstrate to your stakeholders that there are real business benefits to doing this and that your company can thrive as we see stricter measures such as mandatory climate-related disclosures come into force. While the adoption and implementation of binding legislation is desirable, effective collaboration and voluntary initiatives such as amfori and the UN Global Compact are also key to facilitating the transition to a sustainable economy, society, and future. Our 10 principles are universal values for companies operating across a range of different sectors and countries. This can be a useful approach. If you set your own bar higher, you don't need to worry as much about meeting only minimum requirements. Ultimately, the best businesses will not wait for regulation and legislation. They will instead strive to lead progress on both human rights and the environment. Despite the challenges, there is still tremendous opportunity for the private sector to not only contribute to building a sustainable environment and societies, but also to create a competitive advantage, build business resilience, and improve innovation. By conducting a holistic, proactive, and flexible due diligence exercise, whilst continuously improving practices, companies will be able to understand and address interlinked human rights and environmental impacts, ensuring business continuity whilst mitigating operational, legal, financial and reputational risks and increasing their value, investment opportunities and market share. With a critically limited amount of time left to address environmental and human rights related risks, I call on all of you here today to implement the learning from the sessions over the next couple of days, to take a holistic, collaborative and proactive approach to building a better future for all in the decade of action. Thank you.